Cloud.
Man, hey.
Who else you
Hey,
got?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I had a couple other people. I had one.
His
sorry,
dog.
my daughter's playing
Healthy.
hide and
Oh,
seek
it's all
in the
good.
background.
I got to reach out to Dave Gomez. He was talking this morning that he was going to jump in. Unfortunately, Chardulo was not able to make it. Originally, he said he was off on Thursday, but now I guess he has to work. And then Jeremy's not going to be able to make it. All right. Jaime says that 9 o'clock is his bedtime. So are we already Facebooking it?
No.
No. All right. So this one I kind of decided because early in my jiu-jitsu career.
No, go ahead.
No,
it's recording right now, so keep talking.
Yeah, but this isn't going to be going out on the live portion. So
it's top 5 influential.
Top 5 influential matches, MMA or jiu-jitsu.
you gotta be quiet now, okay?
Unless she has an opinion.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're getting the live stream going right now.
Oh no, it's all good. I like how it tells you you're being live streamed and then it gives you the option to leave in case you didn't like that.
In case you're like, oh no.
Well, they kind of have to for legality purposes.
Yeah.
Because isn't it illegal to record someone without their knowledge?
Yeah, I do think you're supposed to announce it before recording them. So.
Okay. All right. That's it. Nobody's waiting for us, unfortunately.
Well, I reached out to Dave because it's not even 9 yet.
That's true. That's true.
So technically,
close, 1 minute. It's got 1
it's close.
minute.
What did I do?
Stop.
Tried getting some of the fighters on, but you know.
Yeah.
They're wusses.
Wusses.
Hans unfortunately has a part of his like work thing forbids him from doing broadcasts of that nature.
Oh, really? I'm not gonna lie.
No, Dave.
No, Dave.
So it's just us.
Just us.
Just
Man, we got
to
bring the heat.
Hey, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. This when you first told me the subject, I was thinking, all right, this is gonna be easy. And then when I started thinking about it, I was like, man, I got to do some research too on this.
It's tougher.
It was actually pretty tough.
So for those, the premise was top 5 most influential matches, MMA or jiu-jitsu. And I specifically put them together because for me, when I started jiu-jitsu and MMA might as well have been synonymous with each other because everyone who was training MMA or jiu-jitsu was doing it because of UFC 1 or UFC 2. And so in those early roots, it's really hard to separate the two. They start to separate a little bit later on down the road. But then for me, the question really came down to is what was really influential. So Hans was throwing out for one of his that he was talking about during today's training. He was talking about like Alio versus Kimura.
Okay.
And I mean, it's the first move that I know of where it had a movement named after a guy.
Right.
You know,
Right,
for a match that goes way back when. And that's the match that Elio gets his arm broken, you know, and things of that nature. So I mean, I definitely, for me, that definitely has a place, but I think my list is a little eclectic for different reasons. And so Jeremy, a gentleman that was supposed to be in here, he was asking most influential on a world level or influential on a personal level.
Right.
And I think your personal journey obviously plays a factor as to what you think is most influential. So for those listening, absolutely chime in, because we know that from our personal experience, some of these are not necessarily going to represent what you think is the most influential or played an influence on you or perhaps even the sport. So
yeah, that's kind of when
to
I
be
was
honest with you, I'm not even sure on the ones that I've got if my order even makes
any
difference.
sense. Yeah, 1 through 5.
I couldn't get a number 5. I have everything else, but not number 5.
Yeah, and that was kind of my thing with influential too, was when I was thinking about it, it's like influential, like completely changed the game, influential, like, you know, like the Kimura thing with a certain move or position.
Well, and as a historic thing, I mean, it was a big, I mean, Elio versus Kimura, I mean,
yeah, of course. Yeah, huge.
Is another large factor within the you know, the history of jiu-jitsu. So
yeah.
All right, so who wants to go off with their number 5?
Oh man,
I don't have a number 5, so I have 1 through 4.
Okay, so go Elio Kimura, unless that was
okay. Yeah,
I
can do Elio. No, that wasn't on there.
All right, so mine, BJ Penn versus Edson Deniz. I'm probably botching his name. Okay. This was BJ Penn being the first non-Brazilian to win a world championship. And to me, I thought that was a major thing, especially considering right now, as far as Americans, there's only 4. I mean, there's not that many Americans that have won, you know, world championships in like the IBJJF or what would become the IBJJF. And so BJ Penn, this was it 2000 or 2001? I thought this was major. I mean, in an influence of the American explosion of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And unfortunately, not many people have followed in his footsteps. Mikey Musumeci is one that's followed in those footsteps. But realistically speaking, I mean, BJ's the first. And for me, that was a very influential. I didn't get to see the match. I've only been able to watch video of it in retro, but to know that he did it was pretty significant for me. And I think kind of launching again that American explosion of putting the American grapplers on the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What you got, Matt?
So kind of like what you were saying, when I look at my list, I'm not sure you could rank them 1 through 5 correctly.
Right. Yes.
But I'll say my number 5 is actually Ronda Rousey versus Liz Carmucci.
Okay.
I believe that's how you say your last name. So to me, it was kind of, you know, Ronda Rousey, she came in and that was kind of like the beginning of women's fighting in the UFC. You know what I mean? And when the way she finished it too, with the armbar and everything, kind of running her streak with those arm bars. And it kind of, for me, this was one of those personal influential ones for me, is it made me interested in female MMA. You know what I mean? It's made me start following those athletes more. So, so I've made that my number 5.
That's a good one.
Number 4?
No, you have to talk about your number 5.
No. Number 4. I got Sakuraba versus Hoyler.
Well, that's a good one.
Oh, okay.
It was the first one to really kind of show that the Gracies were not like indestructible.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that was a cool one as far as like influential moment.
Well, Sakuraba for me is probably number 2 on my all-time favorite fighter list.
Yeah.
He's number 2 on my list. Fyodor Emelianenko is my number 1. Sakuraba is my number 2 as far as my my all-time favorite fighters to watch. And
a lot of pride on that list.
but when you look at, I mean, Sakuraba versus Hoyler, Sakuraba versus Henzo, Sakuraba versus Hoyce. I mean, yeah, I agree. Those were all pretty big matches. Now, what made specifically Sakuraba versus Hoyler stand out?
Because I think wasn't that the first like big loss for the Gracies in MMA? I know it was a referee stoppage to a Kimura. Yeah.
Was that Hoyler or was that Henzo?
No, that was Hoyler.
You're talking about dislocated elbow?
Yep, it was Hoyler. I looked it up.
Yeah.
I looked that shit up because I thought it was Henzo first too.
Now, how
They said,
badass
no,
was that
Hoyler.
though? I mean, no tap. I mean,
Yeah. Just like take it, you know what I mean?
And,
That's
and looking at the ref, like,
Yeah,
are,
and then they
are you
contested it because they didn't tap. But
Right.
the referee's like,
Yeah.
nope.
contesting to the referee, like, wait, we ain't done.
yeah.
And yet his arm is like,
This is all tangled up. Yeah.
All right, you baby.
that was Hoyler. My memory is like horrible.
That's
For
that's
some reason, I'm thinking that was Henzo.
That's what
but-
the internet said. Because that when I was thinking about it, I was like, all right, I want the fight that Sakuraba beat the Gracies for the first time. When he started becoming known as the Gracie Killer. And yeah, when I looked it up, it was Hoyler.
My phone is being like totally ridiculous. Sakuraba, Gracie,
He's fact checking me. See how this
elbow. No,
Yeah.
I'm fact checking my
He just wants to
own-
make sure. I was gonna say he wants to make sure he's correct on his end.
Yeah, I don't know if that was the elbow break, but it was a.
It's Henzo.
But it was.
Henzo Gracie, Sakuraba breaking my arm was the worst pain I've ever felt.
Right, but Hoyler's match.
Did he
with
get
Sakuraba
both?
Was stopped
Did he get both
by-
of them though?
By referee's decision. What I saw.
No, but I was specifically talking about the dislocated arm or the elbow or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
That was
That was Henzo.
that was Henzo.
Yeah.
Hoyler was Hoyler getting his legs kicked like relentlessly, wasn't it?
Yeah, but they said that it was stopped with an arm lock by a referee. That's what I thought. Anyways, it's your turn.
All right, my turn.
Number 4.
My
So
turn.
stop tearing mine apart.
All right, so my number 4 for me was Valij Ishmael versus Hoyce Gracie. Okay, Hoyce competed in the early UFCs, and the only loss that Hoyce had was when they threw in the towel against was it Harold Howard before the match even began.
Oh yeah.
So Hoyce had just had that match against Chemo, won that match, but then on the very next one, they walked out to the cage
Threw in the towel.
and then they threw in the towel before the match even began. So as far as like he hadn't been defeated in
Combat,
in real combat. And Valij and Hoyce had a no time limit match. Now, granted, it didn't matter, but Valij choked Hoyce completely unconscious in the match. Now, granted, this was not a big thing like, oh my God, Hoyce is beatable. Okay, because realistically speaking, this was Gracie Jiu-Jitsu versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
But I mean, Hoyce was the face of the Gracie family at that moment because of the UFC and things of that nature. And so it was a big deal when this happened. All of the media outlets and everything else were covering it because, like I said, Hoyce was the face. And I was looking at it as here's an individual, not a member of the Gracie family, who got to a very high level and actually beat Hoyce. Again, I think it was a clock choke he got him in and choked him actually unconscious. Royce did not tap, and he went out. And so again, for me, this was one of those where again, BJ Penn, a non-Brazilian, making it to the top of the podium at Worlds, and now yet again here you have a non-Gracie showing that through their system that you don't have to be a Gracie to get good.
Right.
And so that's what that kind of represented to me. Because if I'm not mistaken, Village represented the Carlson Gracie side of the lineage. So that's my number 4.
All right, Matt. Number
Nice.
4.
All right, so my number 4 is actually Eddie Bravo versus Hoyler. And I chose, if we're gonna
Nice
go
choice.
one or two, I'm gonna go 2. One was obviously really impressive. It was an ADCC by Triangle. That was awesome. But the second one, I thought, even though
Melissa's trying to look at my list.
Even though 10th Planet was already a thing and all that stuff, I felt like the second one really like solidified Eddie Bravo's legend. And then from there, it just kind of 10th Planet, it had a pretty huge impact on jiu-jitsu, I feel like, because 10th Planet, now is just all over the place and spread out. And I felt like in that match too, he used a lot of
clearly 10th Planet as a team is probably single-handedly the most represented in competition, or
Right.
around. I mean, arguably Gracie Baja, just because they're the single largest organization in the world for jiu-jitsu.
Right.
But I think 10th Planet is, I mean, they are much more competition oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I like that, in that match, I felt like he used a lot of his funky style. He put him in the electric chair a couple times. And
when they had him in the Eviscerator at the end?
Yeah, at the very end, he had it. And it was funny that you guys were talking about Hoyler earlier, I felt like, because I remember the announcer saying, like, he won't tap to joint locks. You have to choke him. And Eddie's just like cranking on him and he's not tapping. It's like, man. But
and then Eddie came out and started talking about how his choice to wear pants ended up biting him in the ass, because it was the pants that kept him from really being able to
because he was
pressure.
Yeah, Hoyer was he, like, the way he had his arms, he was like grabbing the pants of the thing to keep his arms from being able to basically pull away from him. So
right.
And
clearly it was a tight lock. I mean, clearly it was, when you watch the video and everything else, that was a tight position that looked to me like there was no getting out of it unless Eddie released it.
Right, unless he decided he was going to move on. So
if you strictly look at it from the war of attrition, it appeared inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 3. I got Royce Gracie versus Ken 1. Just the historical aspect of it. Of
think about it, the first rivalry in MMA.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
in modern MMA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
So I was looking, not that it was like a spectacular fight or anything, just from the historical aspect of, it really did set up that rivalry. It kind of got people to really pay attention.
Obviously, I mean, the first major rivalry was kind of the whole luta libre versus jiu-jitsu down in Brazil.
Of course.
But this was the modern. This was the Lion's Den versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
And we weren't like in the heart of it, but where we lived was the heart of the Lion's Den.
Yeah.
With Ken and Frank just down the road.
It's just so funny, because then we went.
And then Sensei Eric meeting up with Caesar and Hal, and the Shamrocks are, and so a lot of the people that we were training with were very versed. I mean, they knew Ken and Frank, and they trained over there and things of that nature. I mean, so and Ken has the first submission in UFC history.
Correct.
So it's kind of funny that a heel hook is the first submission in UFC history.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, it's the first in the broadcast.
Right.
There were some alternate fights that took place But if we look at it from the broadcast itself, Ken has the first submission in UFC history that anybody really knew about, and it's a heel hook. So of all things.
All right.
All right. So my number 3 is Eddie Bravo versus Hoyler 1. That's my
okay.
Now, again, it's one of those things. I mean, it's very interesting to me because you gotta give credit where credit's due. Hoyler was the GOAT. I mean, not taking away anything from history or from Hickson, but Hickson for me was the stuff of legend. It was the best of the best saying that Hickson is the GOAT, and Hoyler was documented. Like, you look at Hoyler's exploits and the things that he did, all of his stuff were searchable. His exploits were there. Hickson's was the stuff of legend. So for me, Hoyler, was the active GOAT. Whereas, like I said, Hickson, again, it's impressive when guys like Jean-Jacques and others, I mean, when they say, who's the best? They say Hickson. I mean, you can't deny it. But when you look at activity in the modern realm, Hoyler was the guy. I mean, he was the man. And for Eddie to go out now, again, that's another one of those testaments. This is jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu. I mean, because Eddie is under Jean-Jacques. And so, I mean, Jean-Jacques is relatives. The Machados are relatives of the Gracie. So again, to me, this doesn't detract from the legend of the Gracie family, but it definitely shows yet again that here's an individual learning from that lineage who then steps into prominence. And ultimately speaking, I mean, and when you read, Eddie's like, oh, I knew I was going to get DQ'd, but I was going to do it anyway. And then he gets him with a triangle. You know? And again, Hoyler taps. It's
right.
It's not one of those things. It's not like a ref stepped in. It's not that Hoyler let himself go into unconsciousness or whatever. Hoyler tapped. And then legend was made. And again, it's a shout out to, again, it's putting that on the list. To me, it doesn't diminish anything that Hoyler did. Actually, I think because of everything that Hoyler did, it makes not only Hoyler's career that much more significant, but I think it's one of those things. Eddie has some great wins under his belt, and it doesn't diminish. Hoyler to me in modern jiu-jitsu is still the GOAT. Just because somebody beat you, doesn't mean they take over your GOAT status. It doesn't mean they take over your spot. Because Hoyler's work is still, his body of work is still one of the best.
Absolutely.
But for Eddie to have taken everything that he's learned from Jean-Jacques, everything he's been able to disseminate from all of everybody else, and then put it in there was monumental. I mean, so that's my number 3.
All right, Matt.
Awesome.
Number 3.
So my number 3 was actually Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman. So
okay.
to me, this was kind of one of those fights that I watched personally, and I just remember, when he got caught after he was, fainting and joking around, basically,
right.
Anderson Silva, throwing his chin out there and all that stuff. When he got knocked down that fight, it was like, it almost felt like a changing of the tides. You know what I mean? Like that you didn't really know what the ripple effect was going to be. And it almost seemed like after that, he was never really the same. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and for him to be dominant for so long as such a dominating champion, and then for that to happen, I just felt like, it kind of influenced where that weight class went from there. You know what I mean?
Well, and when he first got clipped, I thought he was still joking.
Yeah, me too. 100%. I feel like in real time, you're like, oh yeah. And then it's like, no, he just didn't get up. You know what I mean?
Right. And again, it's that match to me really showed great placement equals it's far better than just power, because
Oh
that punch
yeah,
wasn't even that
absolutely.
hard.
Right.
I mean, but it's the position that Anderson was in when he got hit that
Yeah, just like leaning back and chin up in the air and all that stuff. It's crazy.
The epitome of fuck around and find out.
But again,
Basically.
Anderson for me, I
Basically.
mean, if when we have a GOAT discussion, I mean, again, just because somebody loses,
Oh yeah.
Doesn't take them out of that
as I've always
discussion.
said, I mean, MMA loves to kill its legends. Jiu-jitsu's going down the same path. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, they stay around
Too long.
a long time.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and so, I mean, just because a guy loses, you know, like Anderson loses a match, it doesn't discredit the body of work. Like we were talking about the loss of George St. Pierre to
Yeah.
Matt Serra. It doesn't diminish the body of work that St. Pierre's done, you know, but it definitely does show, you know, an end of an era for Anderson in that regard. And then unfortunately, the rematch ending the way it did, I mean, was devastating. I mean,
yeah.
And unfortunately now, that's happening more often in the UFC now.
What's crazy is there's a photo going around of like 5 fighters, and like 4 of the 5 fighters have all broken their leg like that. It was John Jones, Conor McGregor, Chris Weidman. I think Anderson Silva was in the picture too, and like
Corey
all of them
Hill
broke their leg.
Oh, yeah, Corey
it's
Hill.
crazy.
Yeah, Corey Hill got that same break. And now, how crazy is it that it happens to Anderson Silva and then it happens to Weidman?
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
100%.
There's some voodoo magic going on there.
Right.
Yeah. Oh man, and that one was Chris's was nasty too. Like,
yeah.
It was like, if I remember correctly, it was like the first kick thrown, right? Or something like that.
I think so.
Yeah, it was nasty.
Oh my goodness.
All right, number 2. I got Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonnar.
All right, so you're going for the Ultimate Fighter finale show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was Ultimate Fighter 1, which kind of kicked off a whole different audience.
And it does. I mean,
it's UFC.
100%. 100%.
2, it was probably the most intense fight I had seen up until that. Like,
heck yeah, it was a war.
Up to that point, that was like the first like big war that I recall, that I remember.
Right.
Well, and so I did some research on this one too, because it was one of the fights that I have on my list. And if I'm not mistaken, what I read too was that the reason they did the Ultimate Fighter 1 was to help kind of save the UFC as well. And then on top of having the Ultimate Fighter, then they have the finale, and it becomes this crazy war that everyone remembers. And then both the fighters end up getting contracts. And
now I'm gonna say something controversial, but I mean it's my nature. I know that's the narrative that they put out there about how that this show was gonna it saved MMA. And I think it makes for great stories.
Right.
I don't buy it. I mean, The Ultimate Fighter was an amazing show. I loved it. The everything else. And it is a defining fact, 100%. There's a lot of people that's their entrance. Like there's major events that happen. And this is one of them. This is one of those launching pads for a lot of people. That this becomes why they even started watching MMA in the first place. But I'm not sure I buy that this was one of those fights that saved the UFC. I think it's a great narrative that they promoted, but we can historically go back and look at a few things that they've said about the UFC that I think it's a little bit of marketing play. Because again, it creates a great storyline to be able to say it. And actually, my number 2 plays into part of that storyline. But yeah, I think that definitely that is a pivotal fight in UFC history. I specifically didn't put it on my list because I felt that others would. So
all right. So you're saying I'm basic?
No. No, I just
If you're basic, I'm basic because it's on my list. So
I just felt very confident that
That it was
others
going to get brought up.
that others would have it on their list.
Gotcha.
And that's why I specifically didn't put it on there. So it's kind of like my ability of putting other fights on there for honorable mention. So because I knew that one would be it.
Yes. All right.
So my number 2 is Gina Carano, Cyborg in Strikeforce. So there's the classic line or the classic bite out there of Dana White saying he has no interest in women fighting in the UFC, yada, yada, yada. Now, I've said this for a long time. Again, I think that was a ploy that Dana White has downplayed the thing that he wants most. So when they were preparing to purchase Pride, when they were in negotiations with Fyodor, when they were in negotiations with Brock Lesnar, Dana White has a tendency of speaking ill against whatever it is he desires most. When the UFC bought Strikeforce, and I would love to have a debate with anybody that the number one thing that Strikeforce had
Was the best women's divisions.
was the women's division. And that's what set them apart at that moment. Not saying there weren't other great fighters, but at that moment, Gina Carano and Cyborg were the first women's fight to headline a major event.
And it was major.
Like it was major, massive. Man. It was the fight.
We were at that fight, and that place was packed. And this is at the San Jose
at the
well, what the fuck was that called?
Now it's the HP Pavilion.
Yeah,
or something
it's a
like
big.
That.
It was a huge arena that they sold out.
It for a while. It wasn't this fight, but the very first legal fight in California held the attendance record.
Yeah.
For people, and this place was electric, and it's the one thing the UFC didn't have. The UFC had no women, and here was an organization
that was killing it with women,
all the buzz. And if it's not for this fight, and I do believe it's this fight specifically, if it's not for this fight, the UFC probably does not buy Strikeforce, and Ronda Rousey probably does not get the chance to be the first UFC women's fighter, because it was after this fight, Cyborg beats Carano, which was a great fight. By the way, I mean, Carano almost got an armbar on Cyborg.
Yeah, it wasn't a one-sided fight.
It wasn't a one-sided fight.
Right.
Cyborg becomes champion. Cyborg, I believe, gets stripped of the title.
Yes.
And opens the door. And Ronda happens to be at the moment in which the UFC buys it. Ronda is the reigning Strikeforce champion, which is only like a couple fights after this one. But I believe that this is the fight that ultimately was the reason why the UFC needed to buy Strikeforce in the first place. So the soundbite of Dana saying he's not interested in, I think to be honest with you, I think it was him attempting to downplay as a negotiation tactic, which he has used time and time again, to say, I'm not really interested in that. So let's not really talk about that. And again, that was the number one thing that Strikeforce had that the UFC did not. And it was massive. I mean, it was the buzz when Carano Cyborg was, which again, I want to buy one of those posters for the gym, because I think it's that for women's MMA. Again, they didn't put women's MMA on the map. Ronda Rousey did not invent women's MMA or anything of that nature, because we can go way back on things of that nature. But this was the one that
Strikeforce gave them the first big platform.
Yeah, this was the spotlight match.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
They headlined a major event, and I believe this was on Showtime.
Yeah.
So that's my number 2.
Nice. Awesome.
All right, Matt, your number 2.
So my number 2, in a little different direction, is Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo.
Okay.
So the reason I chose this one is because I felt like, you know, Conor was already on his win streak in the UFC before this fight, obviously. But I felt like this was the fight that Conor kind of changed the game with the talking and the build up and kind of like taking the rivalry to like a whole nother level. And now I feel like that's kind of where the game is at now, all stems back from that. In my opinion, from my experiences in my time. So that's why I chose it as my number 2.
Yeah, and I think that's a great. I mean, I'm publicly very critical of Conor.
Yeah.
And I'm also very publicly critical of the UFC marketing department. And I definitely felt that Conor throughout his career has definitely gotten preferential treatment.
Oh,
and
yeah.
this was one of the first ones that I mean, damn, they did pretty much a worldwide media tour
prior to.
Yep.
And prior to that, I mean, they really hadn't done that.
Right.
Where they paraded this fight around. They did press conferences in Ireland. They did press conferences everywhere. And this was truly one of those where, I mean, they put a lot of effort into the hype. And then when Conor starches him,
yep, you know, and then it just
on the first exchange.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's the thing where he, you know, he talked up so much, and then he, you know, he did this whole Mystic Mac thing where he was predicting, you know, how he was going to knock people out and all this stuff. And then he comes out and does it. It was like the nail in the coffin. You know what I mean? That was like Conor McGregor's a legend, kind of, you know what I mean? With that, the finish he had. So,
and again,
yeah.
And again, this is kind of Eddie Hoyler. I mean, again, not taking away from Jose Aldo. Actually, we have to prop Jose Aldo up and give him his due, because without that, this fight has no relevance.
Right.
Jose Aldo was a dominant force for a long time. And again, we can't, just like with Hoyler, we can't diminish him at all. Absolutely. It's the fact that he was such a dominant force that makes that fight stand out even more.
Right.
I mean, Jose was a monster. I mean, Jose was the first champion in that weight class, and didn't he pretty much control it for like what?
Yeah.
Years?
Yeah, forever.
Yeah, something ridiculous. Something.
All right, now I gotta look, so I don't sound like I'm talking about my butt.
Well, and now, you know, you're talking about someone who's still competing. You know what I mean?
And looks fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, his resurgence back. I mean, he looks really good, and he's young, man. He's still very young. His movie, I think it's on Netflix. I can't remember the name of the movie. It's subtitled, but it's the story of Jose Aldo. It's a fantastic movie. I think if people watched it, I think they would get a much greater appreciation for Jose Aldo.
Yeah.
Where's his? He became the inaugural UFC featherweight champion. That was in 2010 at UFC 123. That was his first. And when did he lose? So 2010. All right. So no, they say that. No, I gotta keep going. He didn't face him then. So was it 2015 when he fought McGregor?
I think so. Yeah, I think when he fought McGregor, it was 2015.
So 5 years, but it was a span of
Still a long time.
Yeah,
It-
5 years in the UFC.
to be a champ for 5 solid
Heck yeah.
years.
well, and unlike again
That's
being
a lot.
being critical of McGregor, I mean, Aldo has a crap ton of defenses.
Oh yeah,
That's
absolutely.
and that's one of the things I'm very critical of with McGregor is that he actually has none.
Yeah, he was always moving around. It was like he'd win the belt and then he'd go up a weight class, or you know what I mean, or
Right.
he'd go box, and so
Now that was also, I mean, very very good for Conor. He definitely showed for a lot of people that a fighter can take more control over their career,
right.
especially in MMA. You know, which was another big thing. You know, others kind of played the route of let's wait and see what the UFC wants to give me, and Conor basically said, "No, I'm going to orchestrate my path." And I think for me, that's the biggest thing that's my biggest takeaway for Conor. It's that he said, "No, I'm going to take a little bit more charge over my career path."
All right, Matt, you're number 2.
That was his number 2, isn't it?
Oh, that was his number 2. Did we lose you, Matt?
You're frozen.
You're frozen. No.
I'll give him a second.
Yep. I don't know if you can hear us, Matt, but you're frozen.
Yeah. Gotta love technology. It's a blessing and a curse.
If you need to, exit out and then ask to come back in. We'll jump you back in.
I'll message him on this.
There he is. Can you hear us, Matt?
You know, usually when it goes to that screen, they've lost part of their feed.
Man. We're on a roll too. We're up to number 1.
Almost there.
Almost there.
I'm messaging him.
Should I go with my number 1?
Let's give it a couple seconds.
All right.
Now, for those of you out there, I mean, I know some of you probably think that, you know, oh, you're yelling. No, they got this one wrong. This fight should have been on there. So, you know, give your comments. Let us know what fights we missed, what fights you think were more influential. It's a huge sport, especially when you consider both jiu-jitsu and MMA. And again, the reason why I did is a lot of it was synonymous for us. Oh, he's in there twice.
I don't know what happened.
I don't either. Let's see if I can ditch this one.
Yeah, you're in twice now.
Okay, removing him.
I kicked and then I just had to log back in, but
There you go.
There, we're good now. All right, so
Man, I was talking some really good stuff there too.
all right, we're on to number 1.
Numero uno.
Unfortunately, Dave stole my thunder. I
Ooh.
had Carano versus Cyborg for my number 1.
That's what
For
you were-
all of the reasons we already talked about.
Ah,
And, you know, obviously my number 1 had to be a chick fight. Had to be.
yeah, makes sense.
You know.
well, and like I said, I mean, it was electric.
Yeah, it was
I mean,
epic.
Well, not only that, but the buzz leading up to the fight
It was
I mean,
huge.
the discussion, kind of like people talking about McGregor, Aldo, things of that nature. The buzz leading up to that fight was, I mean, huge.
Because Carano was pretty dominant leading up to that.
Well, and that's where, ultimately speaking, and then that's one of the reasons why I truly believe the UFC had to take notice. They had no choice. The buzz was massive. At that point in time, people were not talking about a UFC fight.
No.
They were talking about an organization that was not the UFC and talking about fighters and champions that were not UFC fighters or champions.
Yeah.
And And I think that was massive. I think at that point in time, they went, whoa, wait a minute. We got to do something.
Right.
Strike Force had signed their deal with Showtime, which is the only reason why we even bought Showtime.
Well, and I think this really showed everybody that women's MMA had an audience.
Yes.
Because that was always the big thing. Nobody wants to see that, nobody wants to see girls get beat up.
Right.
But I think it proved that there was an audience for it.
Right.
All right, Dave, you're number one.
So anybody that wants to let Gina know and Cyborg know,
we would love to have them on the podcast anytime.
Absolutely. And actually, I like I said, we probably have a program somewhere because I'm a pack rat when it came to that stuff. I didn't realize I was, but when it came to like little things like programs and things of that nature, posters, I somehow ended up with a lot of stuff. But I can't find that one. So I would love to go online to eBay or something of that nature and find, a poster signed or whatever for, because just to put it out there, I'm the guy. I got Melissa to buy me a Playboy magazine because it's one of the first articles written about
the UFC,
what would later become the UFC.
He's like, hey, I need you to buy me a Playboy. Hear me out.
Hear me out.
This is why.
It was the first article when Jorge and Gracie and the whole thing about the Gracie Challenge and everything else gets written about in the Playboy articles, pre-UFC, pre all that stuff. And so I pleaded my case, why I needed this piece of history.
Yeah.
And he got it.
I did. I got 2 of them. So
all right, Dave.
And so but I've thought about like getting something I can put him in and then open it so that the article is readable. Because again, I dig this kind of history and things. I mean, name something else where, like MMA. I wasn't part of it from the beginning, but I was able to witness it from the beginning.
Right.
I was able to see its growth, and I was able to be around people who were part of its growth. Like I said, Lions Den was like 20 minutes down the road from us. I won't say I was friends with Ken or any of those people, but I knew people that trained with them. I knew people that actively did. And so we got to see that growth. Name something else that's, to me, this is historic stuff, and I was born prior to the space race, so I can't say that I was there. I got to see us put the first rocket or people in space.
Right.
But we can say that with MMA. To me, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Which then brings me to my number one.
Segue.
So for a lot of the OGs, if you will, UFC number one was surprisingly not most people's introduction to the UFC. It was UFC 2. Because UFC 1, most people saw UFC 2 and then went back and then looked at UFC 1. Because I remember I was working graveyard shift and we were watching like knockout videos from kickboxing and things of that nature. And a guy comes in and brings a videotape of UFC 2 from the broadcast that had just happened. And Patrick Smith versus Scott Morris was the first one that made us go, holy shit, this is not pro wrestling. That was real.
Yeah.
And it was that fight that I hear from a lot of people. UFC 2, that match, where people went, oh my God, this is not, this was, because a lot of people thought it was like pro wrestling in the beginning. And when they saw that fight, they were like, this is not pro wrestling.
Right.
And then it went from there. So for me, Pat Smith versus Scott Morris was a significant turning point of basically showing and proving that this was real. And when I watched it, I was like, I mean, this is the fight for me that launched it all. And then I go back and I watch UFC 1. Now, obviously, Hoist does well in UFC 2, and then so Hoist becomes kind of that pivotal figure even in UFC 2. And then we have me going back and watching UFC 1 and seeing Hoist in that event. Unfortunately, Ken Shamrock was, I believe, not in UFC 2. I believe he was present, but I don't believe he was in UFC 2. I thought he had a broken hand
Gotcha.
in UFC 2, I think. And UFC 2 was a 16-man tournament, not an 8-man tournament. So
Right.
that's my number one.
All right, Matt. You have the
So
final say.
Yeah, so my number one, we already talked about a little bit, but I picked the Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner one as my number one.
So I stole your thunder.
Yeah. So, I mean, we already talked about it a bunch, but I just remember, obviously, I watched replay of it, of course, but watching replays of it, the kind of just the first real like war of MMA, fight that I had seen at the time. And then I fell into the trap of the marketing with it, of course, about being saving the UFC kind of and bringing in new audience with the Ultimate Fighter. So, but of course,
like I said, for a lot of people, that fight,
that was their introduction.
That fight represents my Scott Morris, Patrick Smith moment. I mean, for a lot of people.
Right. I mean, bloody and it was kind of cool too, that both of them got contracts and stuff.
Now that was on Spike TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so again, it's all these pivotal things. I mean, you look at early UFC, man, you were catching bootleg stuff. You weren't catching. And then my parents, luckily enough, we had a big satellite dish. So I was able to pick up UFC from UFC 3. UFC 3 is my first one that I paid pay-per-view money to buy. And I think it was only like $10. Yeah. To be honest, I think it was like $9.99.
Wow. And so it was actually funny for me. The first time I saw UFC 1 was actually when I was in the Army. I went to a combatives thing, and all the instructors were like, all right, we're going to go through class, but first we want to show you like UFC 1.
Right.
Like it was going to turn us into some kind of UFC fighter.
That's
but
funny.
So we watched UFC 1 before we started class. But
oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Now was that a Blockbuster video? Because that's where I found UFC 1.
Yeah. Pretty funny.
Well, awesome. Now I'm looking forward to our GOAT conversation.
Now, interesting. So that puts Forrest and Stephen Bonner on the map. I mean, the whole show, that fight, everything else. And I mean, and Forrest goes on to have a pretty good career in the UFC. And so Christian gets a opportunity to fight for Dana White's Contender Series. So we threw our Origin Fight League, and then I turn around because the Contender Series I think fought on a Tuesday. Yeah, it's Tuesday night Contender Series. So we did ours on a Saturday night. Christian already had to fly out there, so that fight was Christian's brainchild. So Christian is literally in Vegas, getting ready to fight for the Contender Series and busting our balls over because he's
watching the live stream,
right.
And he's watching the live stream. He's like, "Why the hell this fight going before this fight?" And I'm like,
right.
Dude,
so
I got
so we did that, and then Sunday, I can't remember what we're doing. So I fly out super early Monday morning to get there in time to watch Christian do weigh-ins, and then after weigh-ins, we stepped over to the PI, the UFC's PI, the Performance Institute, and got to move around in their cage over there and everything else. So we're upstairs, pretty much got the place to ourselves. They have a full-size cage up there for like a press room. They got cameras at every angle, a touchscreen TV that you can watch footage of your training session. And while we're up there, Forrest comes walking through and he's like, "Hey guys," and he walks over and he's changing the garbages out inside the PI.
What?
Yeah. Here's this guy that, that, I mean, he's done his stuff,
Yeah.
and everything else. And yet, I mean, here he is at the PI, and I literally say this with the utmost respect, that he's humble enough
Right.
that he's doing things that he sees needs to be done, not because, he's like, oh, well, this is beneath me or things of that nature. He's just that guy.
Yeah.
That here he is, he sees something that needs to be done, and he's just over there. He's changing out the garbage and the upstairs stuff. It's full of water bottles and things of that nature. And he's just like, hey guys, you guys getting a good workout? And changing the trash upstairs at the PI. And I'm just,
Wow.
I mean, I never get starstruck, things of that nature. I don't get into that kind of stuff. But it was one of those things. To me, that's the hallmark of a martial artist. That he doesn't believe that anything is beneath him. It needs to be done. So here we are at the PI. We're moving around, we're getting that work in, and here's Forrest that, for all intents and purposes, I mean, he could do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And he's humble enough that he's literally changing out the garbage within the building. I thought that was just, for me, it was just one of the coolest experiences.
That's awesome.
And again, I truly think that's a hallmark of a real martial artist, not
right.
That again, it's you do what needs to be done because you think it needs to be done. Not because it makes you money, not because of anything else other than it needed to be done.
Yeah.
And like I said, I thought it was the coolest thing. Gave me a completely different level of what's the word I'm looking for? Respect for Forrest in that moment. I mean, like I said, I thought it was just a cool thing. We're still hoping to maybe make our way back to the PI or to the Apex Center or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting list. Again, I know people out there, you guys are probably yelling at it, yelling at the screen, going, "No, you guys are dumb. This match should be in there."
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I say is, we put ours out there, so yours out there, and then we'll second guess your list. So, a lot of people can talk, but put it out there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Matt, for hanging out with us again.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Then we'll have to smack down some of the other guys on the next.
Yes.
So what do you think should be a topic that we should possibly look at for another discussion?
Oh man. Well, at training, we obviously, the GOAT list has been going around. That one's going to be a really hard one, I feel like.
I feel that's going to be hard.
I feel like it's going to be hard, and the discussion is just going to be nonstop, basically. But
I mean, okay, so I think it would be an interesting discussion, but I don't think it's going to be as diverse.
True.
I think the question more is just going to be who's number one, but I think the list now, as a side note, I was going to put on this list of most influential matches. I think the Gordon Ryan Andre Galvao match, if it happens, and I still put that asterisk on it that I have my doubts that the match will actually take place. But I think it could be one of those pivotal matches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because although the hype has kind of died down a little bit, it was going like gangbusters.
Yeah.
But the hype has kind of died down, and I don't know. I have my doubts if the match will actually come to fruition. But if it does take place, I think it's going to be a match that's going to have a lot of eyes on that particular matchup.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to become potentially one of those pivotal, because jiu-jitsu is struggling right now, just like MMA was back in its heyday, of trying to find that audience to make it a viable professional sport.
Right.
And I think this is going to be one of those matchups that could play a pivotal role in becoming that origin of it becoming professional sport where, I mean, because like same thing in the early UFC, fighters weren't making enough money to be professional. They were still working their day jobs, things of that nature. The pay-per-view monies that were coming in weren't all that significant. You got to think, I mean, you win UFC 1, you got to check for what, 50,000?
Yeah.
I mean, now granted, I mean, if somebody paid me a single check for 50,000, I wouldn't have to work a day job. But again, I mean, most of the fighters didn't make that kind of money. It was only the only number one.
Yeah.
And I think professional jiu-jitsu is in that same struggle. And it takes a breakout matchup like Gavao and Gordon Ryan to potentially become that breakout. I mean, and I think that,
well, you think what'll be interesting about this ADCC as well is legacy wise for Gordon, if he does beat Galval, he's also doing his weight class as well, which has never been done before. So if he wins his weight class and wins the super fight, that'll be a whole nother legacy thing that'll be kind of interesting when they put that in the who's who GOAT talk,
Right.
So
now, at the same time, though, again, not to take away from Gavao, I mean, he's been 10 plus years in ADCC as the number one guy.
Yeah, so, I think 6 times he's won the super fight. So
and ADCC is only every 2 years.
Yeah, so 12 years. Yeah.
So again, it's one of those Gordon beating Gavao doesn't strip away any of his past victories.
Right,
what it does is it, at least for that moment, it puts a pause and says, now here's Gordon Ryan building his items. And it kind of says, here's potentially a stopping point in those accolades for Gavao.
Right.
And now the question becomes, when Gordon's creating his accolades, where do his stack up in relationship to that? Now, if Gavao beats him, that puts a major exclamation point for his accolades. I mean, kind of like when Hodger, I mean, was it Buchecha?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you're talking just like Gavao and Gordon Ryan. Gordon Ryan's the new lion. Gavao's the older lion.
Right.
And Hodger was the old lion. GOAT. Buchecha was the new lion. And Hodger showed that, as that old lion, he's not done. I mean,
yeah, that's definitely gonna be interesting. I'm really excited for ADCC this year. So
when that matchup, if that matchup happens, you may be seeing me change my list.
Yeah.
So.
All right, man. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Do it again.
Yep.
Next time.
Yep. We'll have to get some more people next time.
Yeah.
Our list needs to be more controversial.
No, we have great lists.
Have a good night.
All right.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
All right, see ya.